Well, this is a webinar promoted by South Asia Democratic Forum that has titled India and Climate Change. And this webinar is going to be animated by two fellows of the Global India European Training Network. A network that where SADF is participating, and that is joining 6 major universities in Europe, 6 major universities in India, as well as 6 other organizations like think tanks like SADF. This is one of the most important global topics that SADF has been promoting. So we are really very thankful for both participants. They are Shruti Neelkantan. She is enrolled in the Dublin City University. She is an Erasmus Mundus Master's graduate in Environmental Sciences, Policy and Management. She is researching on India and environmental politics, and she is examining the state-level climate plans for evaluating performances in the Indian states. She will, in her presentation, she will analyze the potential drivers and the impacts of climate politics at the state level to understand how India is doing. She will be identifying the position of India regarding the European Union in international climate development. She will be our first speaker, and then we will have another Indian scholar in the same program, Tanvi Deshpande. She is enrolled in the University of Heidelberg. She has a Master of Science in Climate Change from the University College of London. She's a Marie Curie Fellow, and she is pursuing her PhD on India and the politics of climate change at Heidelberg University in the South Asia Institute. She will be speaking on explaining global India, a multi-sectoral. This presentation will be part of explaining global India, a multi-sectoral PhD training program for the emergence of India as a global player. She will be also addressing climate change. And before joining the South Asia Institute on Climate Issues, she was working on climate issues at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements in Bangalore, India. Unfortunately, Ms. Deshpande will not be able to show an image because she has very little internet connection. She is now in India, in Maharashtra. So we will hear her, but we will not have the pleasure of seeing her. Mrs. Neelkantan, she is in Aachen, not very far from Brussels, and she will be in image as well. So we will first hear our both speakers, and then we will have a discussion that will be animated by questions and answers that you might raise during the debate. You can use our software of Zoom to do it. This is it. without further delay, I think I will pass the floor immediately to Ms. Nilakantan. Yes, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to just share my screen. Yeah. Deshika, I can't, it says disabled, so you have to allow me to share it.
You are there. I can see you.
Yeah, no, I want to put my presentation, so I need to share my screen. Yeah. Is it possible? I'm not sure. Okay.
1 moment, please.
Yes. It says host is disabled. So.
Please go ahead.
Yes. Okay. Can you see it now?
There, it's there. Very good.
Perfect. So good morning. My name is Shruti, and my research focuses largely on climate policy and politics at the subnational level in India. But you know, India, we have 29 states and 6 union territories, so it made a good starting point would be to identify 1 or 2 states and just explore what's going on in the states when it comes to climate policy. Who are the actors? How are they approaching this? What's working for them and what's not? Just to give you a bit of context, you know, India, we are a federal nation, and the center is the powerhouse. But recently, the center has been trying to decentralize some of the efforts, and one of them was climate policy. So in 2009, the states were asked to come up with their state action plans. So it's been over a decade now. So my research examines on how they've gone about it and what are some of the things that we can observe through this. One of the more interesting things is that the center had mandated the states, they had the same instruction, but somehow some states were performing better than the others. So there is some variation. So the larger interesting puzzle is to understand what are these factors that could explain the variation. This is a smaller part of the research where I look at a case study of Odisha and explore its coastal area management policies. So Odisha, just to give you a little bit of context, it's in the eastern part of India. It's the 9th largest state, and as you can see, it is a coastal state. So there's a lot of coastal related disasters, water related issues that the state experiences. And just in the last decade or so, that the state has experienced over 13 major disasters. Which means they've been on the forefront trying to identify what they can do better, how they can overcome some of the issues, and how they can implement some policies more effectively. And one of the more interesting things about Odisha is that since 2009, they've been very actively engaged with the state action plan process. The state action plan essentially is a guiding document for the states as to how they would approach climate policies. So then I take it a bit further in my study and understand what could be those primary actors that would explain what shapes the climate policy in a state. So largely it's the state capacity, the non-state actors, and international donors. When it comes to state capacity, I ask, how does the state steer climate policy? What kind of political and financial support do they offer? What is the internal infrastructure in the state? And what really goes on? Who are the people in charge? And when it comes to non-state actors, it's like, do they lobby for policy change? What is their role? Are they pro-climate actors? And are they anti-climate actors? How does this shape the performance of the state? And lastly, I speak of international donors. Donors essentially are known to fund projects, design projects, and they bring in a whole set of tools. So how do they influence the state's climate policy? So I'm going to share some of the findings. I had the opportunity to go and speak to some of these people in India, in Odisha, in New Delhi, and talk to them at length with some of these issues. And I found some really interesting things. And one of that is in Odisha. as a state, the political party in power has been in power for 8 years. So they've had the same leader for 8 years. And there's a great sense of comfort that the State Department takes from this. And the people who are working with each other, they're familiar, they're very comfortable in their roles. And when this happens, there's a lot more willingness. They want to be proactive and they want to take up more work. And this has led to formation of their own climate change cell with dedicated personnel for coastal area management by itself. And Odisha is also one of the states where they've allotted budgets as part of their state funds exclusively for coastal and disaster related work. So these already sets the state apart on what they're doing differently. But some of the things that were also, that I was able to identify is that when this task was given to them in 2009, it really took the state officers by surprise, because they all know what the problem is, but they don't necessarily know how it works in a framework as actionable plans or proposed solutions with technical knowledge. So there was this sort of a jarring effect that the state officers were experiencing, and that was clearly a gap that they continue to experience. And the other is that, as I mentioned earlier, that India, the center is the powerhouse. Everything happens in the center. Although the state has some amount of autonomy on what they decide, they look up to the center for help when it comes to finance or other forms of support, but mainly direction. They lack direction. And that's the kind of center-state relations dynamic that would shape the state's climate efforts. When it comes to non-state actors, again, very interesting. There's been one consulting agency which has taken the state's efforts from the beginning, and continues to lead the state's action plans, which means the same team of people are working with the document. They're able to see what's working and what's not and change accordingly. But the non-state actors also seem to be more involved at the local level. They're talking to the fishermen and women in the village. They're developing first response teams, and they're talking to the donor agencies. They're talking to the state development officers. So they seem to be interacting a lot. But another interesting thing that happened was, because the state officers were not adequately equipped to write the plans on their own, they outsourced this task to the NGOs. So the NGOs and the consulting agencies essentially conduct social impact assessments, baseline assessments, and they put the plan together. And they are active in the policy cycle. But however, just like how the state is dependent on the center for funding, the non-state actors are dependent on the state for funding. So now we're seeing some sort of a multi-governance power structure that is forming, where one person ultimately, holds the umbrella together. But the other interesting that also came up was, while they're involved in writing up the plans and implementing, they're left out in one part of the policy cycle where all the decision making happens. And this is often a closed door affair. And the non-state actors feel that there is a lack of representation of civil society, and just by including them in the whole policy cycle could improve the project results and relations with the other actors. Lastly, when it comes to international donors and their climate support, Odisha has actually been a hub where people want to fund Odisha. They want to come and help out the state. So the World Bank has funded Odisha at some point, UNDP has funded them, and currently DFID is funding them with their state action plan, but the other donors still engage with the state on different capacities. And along with the funding, they bring forward excellent knowledge management and capacity tools that the state has never been introduced to before. So it's always very exciting to work on platforms, new softwares, and sort of come up with a more nuanced framework in which they can aid the policy towards. And what they've also brought in is elimination of bureaucracy, which otherwise exists. There's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of waiting period. And when it comes to coastal and disaster, there is not a lot of time that one can wait. Two, again, very interesting things that came up were that most of these projects are either contractually bound for 3 years, maybe 5 years, and there are jobs that have been generated in this period. So when the contract ends, what happens to these people? What happens to their jobs? Do the tools they had access to, do they cease to exist? So what's going on there? And when asked the donors, they agree that this is an issue, but they also admit that this is a work in progress, that they are trying to integrate more sustainable techniques and design in their projects and how the state can carry forward these efforts even after they're contractually done. This is a large issue, is that each international donor has their own way of how they measure performance. They have their own targets, they have their own indicators, they have their own KPIs. So each time you look at a report every few years, it's telling you a different story. And mostly the stories are about the donors. So the reports talk a lot more about what the donor agency is able to do rather than the progress of the state, which is a massive gap when it comes to subnational climate policy. So keeping these findings in mind, I have 4 policy recommendations that I find reasonably more actionable and practical. And one of the things that the study I was able to identify is that there is no space for these actors to interact. There is no space where there's people from all of these actors, the non-state, the state, the government, they come and sit together or have a coffee and talk about what's going on in the state, to learn, to unlearn, to share. And this doesn't happen within the state, and this doesn't happen across the states. And just by having this platform, there could be a lot more that the state can learn from and adopt. And one other thing that could emerge out of this effort is to standardize the monitoring and evaluation system, because then the state is able to look within and reflect what they're able to do and what's going wrong and what's going right, and sort of share with each other. And as researchers, it also enables us to understand which state needs what kind of help and provide more specifically tailor-made responses rather than just going and making generous donations when maybe that's not the requirement of the state. But these 2 issues stem from a larger point that there is no body that's overseeing any of the actions that I'm talking about. There is the Ministry of Environment in India, and they collect all the action plans. They maybe publish it online, and they hold occasional workshops, but there is no guidance that the states receive from an agency that can provide them more continuous help and guidance, whether it's money, whether it's how to make their plan more practical. So this is definitely missing. And I think the last point that I would make is all the things that I've talked about, whether it's non-state actors, whether it is the donor agency in intervention or state capacity, this is applicable at a global level. Any global subnational region will be able to relate to this and associate with this. Unfortunately, this is not a platform that's opened up just yet, but I think India and its states could benefit largely from this, because there are resources now, there is some money coming in from the donor, we have the capacity, but a lot of the plans as it stands are they're textbook responses. Maybe they're not always actionable. So it helps when we're able to learn from other countries, especially federal nations, on how they're going about things. And maybe they'll be able to learn a thing or two from us as well. And this is definitely something that's missing. And it's very easy to put together. It's not capital intensive, nor is it labor intensive, but simply a matter of bringing all these actors together and just be able to shape the climate debate in a more fruitful and impactful manner. So these were my findings and recommendations, and I hope you found it interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Neelkantan.
Yeah.
We saw a first presentation coming from the experience in the state of Odisha, and the respective recommendations. We are now going to another area in India. We are going to listen on the climate lessons from Rajkot by Ms. Deshpande. As I already said, unfortunately, we will not have images, but we will have the sounds. So we are very much looking forward to hearing you, Mr. Deshpande.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all well and safe. I would like to thank the South Asia Democratic Forum, especially Siegfried, Deshika, and Paulo for giving me an opportunity to present my research in your webinar series. As Paulo mentioned, I can't join you by video, but I'm here I hope you can hear me clearly. I'm having a little bit of network issues, but I'm hoping that my internet holds strong. So the focus of my study is basically to understand how are cities in India pursuing climate action. It's a well-known fact that cities in India are grappling with multiple challenges like development deficits, rapid urbanization, and resource competition. More specifically, local action is hindered due to the lack of financial and technical capacity among local governments. Also, clientelistic practices lead to regulatory capture, which impedes service delivery. At the local level, there is also a general lack of awareness, financial support, dedicated institutions, and an accountability towards climate change, as it is still considered as a global problem requiring global solutions. So my study looks at 1 million+ non-metropolitan cities which are located in semi-arid regions which typically face water shortages. I'm comparing two similar Indian cities with respect to climate action, particularly water. However, today I will be discussing the climate action with respect to water adaptation measures from one of my field sites. Now, adaptation typically involves adjusting to both actual and expected climatic impacts, which results in improved adaptive capacity and resilience. The point of departure of my study is from the 1990s till present day because, among other reasons, the urbanization trend in India sort of increased following India's liberalization in 1991. So now coming to my case, I studied Rajkot city, which is located in the western part of India in the province of Gujarat. The map here depicts the location of both the province and the city. The city has a population of about 1.6 million and is located in the semi-arid parts of the province and experiences scanty rainfall. So its average annual rainfall is about 500 millimeters. And the city is governed by a municipal corporation, which is responsible for the provision of services like water supply. The municipal corporation has taken significant climate action, both with respect to climate adaptation and mitigation across different sectors, which has gained it domestic and global recognition. So in 2019, the city voluntarily ratified the Climate Resilient City Action Plan. Then the city has also committed to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 14% by 2023. And from the 1990s, the city has implemented a range of climate actions across different sectors, be it water, transport, electricity, housing, etc. So all these factors have, in fact, resulted in Rajkot gaining a lot of international and domestic attention. Also, the mayors of Rajkot are members of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy since 2015, and the Gujarat Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy since 2019. These platforms basically enable city leaders to collectively address climate issues. Now, as a consequence of all these efforts, the city has won the National Earth Hour Capital Award in 2015-16 and the One Planet City Challenge Award in 2018. These were both WWF initiatives to mobilize climate action from cities. Now, before going into Rajkot's climate action with respect to water, I'll briefly discuss the domestic governance framework that aided local efforts, especially in terms of water adaptation. Broadly speaking, there were two categories of schemes and programs, both at the regional and the national level. So, firstly, there were schemes that promoted urban infrastructure development. For instance, the JNNURM, the Amrut, the Smart City Mission, and the Swarnam Jayanti Mukhyamantri Shahari Vikas Yojana. These mainly provided financial support for furthering local efforts. And the second set of schemes, rather plans, which encourage climate action were the National Action Plan and the State Action Plan. These plans are predominantly mitigation focused, and they helped with capacity building activities, especially in terms of creating an awareness on climate issues, especially at the local level. And unfortunately, India still doesn't have an urban climate policy which guides and mandates local action. So today I'm going to be explaining how has Rajkot institutionalized a climate action plan in 2019, especially in terms of water adaptation. So if you look at the city's history, Rajkot has had a strong memory of acute water shortages. In the last 40 to 50 years, it faced severe water crisis for at least 4 years. And now it has moved to a situation where it has gained water security. So the city, following all these water crises, the city administration undertook a range of micro-level adjustments in the form of water adaptation measures that cumulatively resulted in the resilience of the city. So with respect to water adaptation, the municipal administration systematically addressed its local water and governance challenges by implementing interventions such as strengthening local water sources, conserving available rainwater, reducing the non-revenue water loss, and monitoring water consumptions through metered water supply. So these are actually usual measures that the cities need to take to strengthen their water supply systems, which lead to water security. But there is also a climate adaptation element attached to these measures, because both development objectives and climate change adaptation, they sort of overlap. So these development interventions also resulted in improved adaptive capacity and resilience of cities. So in 2019, a climate resilient action plan was formulated and institutionalized by the City Council. This was a significant step towards climate conscious development. The plan comprised of a detailed vulnerability assessment, sector-specific greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and of which water was one of the most vulnerable sectors with a high greenhouse gas emissions contribution. And lastly, it also included both adaptation and mitigation measures for each sector. Now, with respect to adaptation, the City Council incorporated all the existing water adaptation measures that I mentioned here, along with the future and planned measures. Now, unlike mitigation, adaptation has no guiding framework both at the global and at the domestic level. Because it's complex, it's very contextual, and it has gained importance only in recent years. It's mainly after the Paris Agreement in 2015. So now, how did the city operationalize the mainstreaming of climate actions into local development plans without any legal mandate? So firstly, the city built its capacity, especially its financial capacity, to pursue actions by using or adapting domestic schemes and programs. And it also engaged with technical experts to fill in its technical and knowledge deficits. Also, the climate adaptation and mitigation potentials of existing development projects were identified by the municipal administration. The city had also formulated various sector-specific plans. There were, for instance, there was a city development plan or a low carbon mobility plan. So instead of having individual separate plans, ultimately in 2019, they consolidated to form a comprehensive climate resilient action plan, which comprised of both mitigation and adaptation measures. Also, and finally, the municipal corporation institutionalized a climate core team, which comprised of 40 government officials from different departments within the bureaucracy, and a stakeholder committee, which invited non-state stakeholders. Basically, they were technical experts to formulate and review the action plan. So this was basically done in a collaborative manner. Now, although the climate action plan comprised of existing development objectives, mainstreaming the climate actions into local development agendas reinforce the local government's vision of urban resilience. In terms of water adaptation, Rajkot has definitely exemplified its ability to think globally and act locally. I would like to end with some of the pictures from Rajkot. So, the municipal corporation, in collaboration with local civil society organizations and citizens of Rajkot, painted socially relevant messages on the public walls of the city. So, that is it from me, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanvi, for the presentation of another area of India on the west side, already on a more dry part of India. I think that we got two visions that explained a bit how the issue of climate is being perceived on a state level, in the case of Odisha, on the city level, in the case of Gujarat, in Rajkot. We have already one question. I would like to invite all the participants to raise their questions using our software. The first question is coming from our associate Hannah Madatali. She is a researcher and advisor within SADF, and she addressed Shruti, thanking her for her talk, and well, addressing the issue of global collaboration. Since Shruti's intervention has been geared to the issue of collaboration, do you think that EU and India could be doing more in this respect? Because EU and India have been discussing cooperation on climate issues for a long time, and you have been speaking about how actors need to discuss more between Delhi and Odisha. Do you think that the EU could come into this framework, into this discussion? Or what is your view on that?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah, for the question. It's actually really interesting because when I conducted the interviews and we touched upon these topics, the states felt very left out. They felt very left out of this conversation of collaboration, and because the bilateral and the multilateral ties, the discussions that happen with collaboration, say EU or any other countries, even within the EU, the discussions happen at the national level where the central ministers are more lies with the other country for decisions, and it's a more centrally driven conversation. But the states have expressed their interest, especially in both Odisha and the other state I'm working on is actually Tamil Nadu, where they feel like the state governments want to be involved more and have a more international experience. And for now, they find respite in doing so with the international donors. But and one of the things I remember very clearly from the interviews was that everybody just thinks that money is the thing that can be offered first. But I think there are other ways where they could collaborate, especially when it comes to EU and India. One of the things that the state officers acknowledge is that they acknowledge EU does what they do very efficiently. We want to learn from them. We want to know how they approach a policy area. We want to know what kind of discussions take place, how they're able to do address more top-down and bottom-up approaches. And I think this is a learning curve that the states are opening up to now. And beyond just financial help or trade of technology, this is a conversation that would help the subnational level policy decisions be more integrated towards actionable decisions, if you will.
Thank you very much. Well, we still have two questions addressed for you. One is coming still from SADF, from Albino Brás. He addresses the issue of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
It is a perception, a common perception that the structure that implements public policies has very often a lack of knowledge on the issues that they are addressing. Do you think that donors to the projects should have as an important concern the fulfillment of this knowledge? That's one of the questions. The other one is coming from one of the participants, Rajkot. Do you think that upcoming climate collaboration in India, like the ICC, well, it does not display what it means by this acronym, International Climate Change something, I suppose, but it's not clarified, have a bearing on national and regional devolution of climate policy. Okay, so if the ICC can have an impact on devolution, national and regional devolution of climate policy, it is a bit worded not in a very clear, straightforward way, but I hope that you could understand it. India Climate Collaborative. Well, okay, I'm not sure what you mean by that, but if you could anyway address those issues, I would be grateful.
For the first question on public policies and what are the gaps in terms of knowledge when there's donor design, it's definitely what stands out as the cultural gap. More donors and more international players are trying to address this by, trying to develop some reports that address this cultural gap. But it is very evident because even in India, there is the culture from one state to another is different. So how they approach, so for even in the case of Odisha, for example, the coastal related disasters impact the fishermen and women it's a first hand effect that they experience. And how the donors approach it, they usually talk framework, they talk reports, and there's a lot of jargon in the way these things are approached. But when it comes to what is happening on ground, they rely on their local NGO partners to kind of take over because there is more cultural context when it comes to this. And I think the other thing, and I failed to mention this in my presentation, is we don't have a reference point. We don't have a reference point where we can learn and say, oh, maybe this is something I can learn. We don't even know what exists for us to pick and choose what to learn. And I think that's an international kind of bring in that we could benefit from, where we're able to collaborate and have some options that are laid out on the table saying, this could really help your state, and then the state is able to identify that, oh, these resources exist, and then pick and choose. And that definitely is missing right now. And for the next question, thank you, Rasika, for your question. I understand what you're asking. Unfortunately, the approach is not straightforward, because one would think that India goes to these international forums, they have all these discussions, they come back, they have a national level discussion, and then the targets are then disseminated at the state level and then at the local level, and then everybody kind of does their role to meet the targets. Unfortunately, that kind of straightforward approach doesn't exist, and I don't see it happening soon. But what would be a good starting point is to just create a platform where all the levels, the national, local, and the subnational region actors can come together and start a conversation, and then take it from there. Thank you.
Well, before getting that I think you raised on this last intervention, let's go now to Tanvi and Anna Matali. She has a question for her. You spoke about how urban development and water management go hand in hand. What part does sanitation and other related measures have in this process? What have the government and the states, the government, I suppose it's the central government and the state, done in this aspect, and what could they do more? Well, that's a very interesting question, because fundamentally you have been speaking, I think both of you have been speaking in terms of mitigation and adaptation to the climate changes, climate challenges. But the issue is how far does the water management itself that you can do impact in climate? That's a bit the reverse of the issue that I think it's very interesting. I'm not sure if Anna wanted to to highlight this issue, but anyway, she touches on the most important issues: urban development and water management. What has been done on these topics that have such a high impact on climate?
Yeah. Thank you, Hannah, for the question, and Paulo for the question. Before I actually go into the question that Hannah asked me, I would actually like to talk about how, in terms of knowledge, I think somebody's asked a question on how there's a lack of knowledge and how donors sort of, through projects design or sort of influence knowledge. Now, I would like to mention this, especially in terms of urban adaptation, which I have seen in Rajkot. Yes, there is, when I say that there is a knowledge deficit, I mean that there is a knowledge deficit in terms of the kind of technologies or the kind of frameworks that are available to, to associate it with climate change or adaptation. But I think the local actors are very well versed with the local practices. They are rooted in the local settings, so they are aware of the context, they know the challenges, and they sort of understand that they need to take action. But I think where the international or even this experts or technical consultants come in is to basically help them assist, gain access to new information, to new technologies. So the question of knowledge is not that straightforward, especially in terms of devolution of knowledge. And with respect to water management and urban development, see, the point is, for India, climate change is a developmental issue. So till the time we don't address our existing developmental problems, be it water management, be it sanitation, health, transport, we will not have the capacity to deal with existing problems. And in case there is an extreme event, which maybe we can or we may not be able to predict it. So if we don't have the capacity now, we will not be able to deal with any future extremes. So in terms of sanitation, yes, the city has done a lot of measures on sanitation. In fact, there was a lot that was done on water, because the city is predominantly semi-arid, and it's, in fact, water is a political issue. So that is why I focused on water. With sanitation, there is what would I say? There is a little bit of existing. I mean, I wouldn't call it adaptation. They are development, business as usual interventions that all cities need to do in terms of having better wastewater treatment plants, better sewage treatment plants. So the city is trying to do that. It is also incorporating superior technology like vacuum sewers, and they're also trying to go energy efficient. So they are trying to, try and be as climate conscious, but also ensure that they meet their existing development objectives. So without sidelining their local priorities, they are, looking at climate change. And with respect to both national and regional governments, well, there is definitely a conscious effort, but it's not enough. And unfortunately, both national and state level policies are very generic. So suppose a city like Rajkot requires water scarcity, doesn't necessarily mean that all cities in that region have water shortages. Some areas have health issues, some areas have heat island effects. So each city or each climate action, in fact, is very contextual. So to have a general umbrella policy is actually a problem. And I think the states and the center, I mean, the regional governments and the central governments are sort of helping them in terms of funding, and also in terms of connecting them with experts, which will help them develop better policies. I hope I've answered the question. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We have already another question, but allow me, before proceeding, to take stock of one of the issues raised by Shruti, the jargon. Well, I think jargon is really what, unfortunately, we face most of the times when we are discussing this issue of climate. And actually, my vision of the issue is that we have been very much focused on the greenhouse gases emissions due to transport, due to energy necessary for industry, due to urbanization itself, to heating and cooling and so on. I think that technologically, more and more, this is a question of the past. I mean, the answers are there, and they are competitive. It's a matter of just sorting out some bottlenecks that exist, especially in terms of batteries, for instance, to make dissemination, to make applied research. I do not really think that this is a tremendous technological issue. It's a matter of will, if we want to sort it out or not. Nevertheless, there is another very much neglected part of the issue, which is the agriculture, if you want, the land management, and within the land management, the issue of water. And water, not only in terms of water scarcity, because even when there is no water scarcity, but we are intensively using a lot of fertilizers that actually are ways of mobilizing a lot of substances that have been fossil carbon and other sort of substances that are that have accumulated during millions of years on Earth, and we are putting them on the environment on a very short period of time. Well, we are exactly causing the same sort of effect that transport based on fuel as, for instance. And regarding the water scarcity, it's very important because if we create deserts, and deserts are created mainly through a bad management, a bad water management, we will be changing climate. We are really making the conditions for change of climate that is not what we wanted. And in water management, perhaps 85% of the water is for agriculture. So I see it as a very difficult thing to discuss water management without speaking about agriculture, without speaking about food, without speaking about the green revolution. What did it bring positive, but what did it bring of unsustainable? And these sort of issues that, to my mind, are the real things that we have to bring into this discussion. They are scarcely there. And I wonder if both of you, if you have anything to say on these issues, because these issues, contrarily to the others, are not sorted out yet in fundamental research terms. I mean, there is not a more efficient, envisaged way of making agriculture, producing food that everybody needs, without all the drawbacks that the present models have. Of course, we have a lot of answers, or part of answers, like, for instance, eating less animal product is a way to reduce the water consumption and the climate impact and so on. We have a lot of partial answers, but we do not have really yet a global answer to this issue. And that's why I think it is so important. Well, and there is a very specific issue that was raised by Rachel Rao. And Rachel Rao is writing from India. And she has a very precise question, so I would just add it to Tanvi. She wants to know if there is any cooperation initiative in Rajkot and with Rajkot and other cities in Gujarat or out of the States. Are there any interesting efforts to replicate what Rajkot managed to achieve? That's a very specific question. Please.
Okay, so I'll try to address Rachel's questions and then come back to Paulo's question. But so thank you, Rachel, for the question. There is definitely a lot of learning between cities, between regions. Typically, cities learn from best practices or demonstration of norms. And this is not just limited within a province or within a region or within a country. I think Rajkot has also learned from its interactions globally. So it's part of many collaborative projects with GIZ, STC. So, through these network meetings, they learn about different projects, not just in developed countries, but also in developing countries like Africa, where India can sort of relate more to. With respect to, Rajkot is sort of setting an example for other cities. I mentioned in my talk that it's part of a Gujarat Covenant of Mayors. So what the state has done is that it has invited all its cities to join collectively and learn from each other about the climate measures that they have taken. So within the state, there are other cities like Surat, which has taken a lot of initiatives because it was plagued, and it had an issue of plague, and it has issues of floods. So the city has also pioneered a lot of climate action. So that way, there is a lot of cross learning between the states, and Rajkot is actually a model city in this forum for other cities in Gujarat. And even through different projects, there is learning with cities like Indore and Shimla. So, I mean, again, the problem is that, yes, you can, have broad learnings of how you sort of operationalize them. But again, without losing the contextuality, it's very hard. So as Paulo mentioned, that, the will to do something is very important. So that's the point, that, despite not having an urban policy, the city, especially the bureaucracy or the local government, had the will to, not just look at water management, but also think ahead and look at climate change. So that will is very, very important. And with respect to agriculture, I mean, of course, agriculture is a significant, I mean, the water use in agriculture is quite high. And with India, actually, there are, institutions that sort of fund research and projects and water management projects, especially in, there's a NABARD bank, which is basically funding initiatives in agriculture. There is a lot of research happening on ground. They might be small scale, they are micro level, and they're looking at drought resistant cropping, and they're trying to use biofertilizers to try and reduce their water pollutions. But unfortunately, they are very, very micro level. And of course, there is scope, and there is a need for them to be upscaled so that there could be more learning. And if you look at the international funding or the climate projects that India has received, a lot of it has actually gone towards the rural areas. And the urban, unfortunately, has been sidetracked. And why urban is important? Yes, agriculture is also important, but what is important about urban is that more than 50% of the population now is living in the urban areas. And whether there is a scarcity of water or not, the competition in terms of growth, in terms of population, in terms of demand, it's sort of limiting existing resources. So even within cities, what happens is that when you don't have water, you actually go to your surrounding peri-urban or villages, and you try and extract water from farms to sort of meet the needs of the city. So there is a lot of complexity involved, and I don't know whether there's one concrete solution to very specific rural and urban problems.
Thank you very much. And Shruti, do you want to say something about this?
I think Tanvi said most things, but I just want to add, and I would reiterate Tanvi's earlier point where she said some of the issues, especially in India, are political. Water is a political issue. Agriculture is a political issue because it has a direct impact on the economy, and what parts of it have to be decentralized and what parts have to be centrally mandated is a continuous debate that happens. And while there are a lot of these little projects that happen at a micro level in silo, there is no concerted effort to kind of say, okay, this is our goal and this is what we want to achieve and this is what we want to do in order to do that. I think that conversation has not even started. So I think we have a long way to go, but it's good that we're at least thinking about it now.
Well, thank you very much. You know that one of the things that is striking me very much in India, and actually I think that the issue is also present in the European Union, is that, well, India is a very decentralized country, and water management is fundamentally something that lies not on the center, but on the state level. Of course, this is also the case in Europe. Well, if you consider the European Union, I mean, the national states have the competence on the rivers. But I think that one of the crucial, aspects of the European integration was exactly to promote cooperation on river basins. The cooperation on river basin management is a crucial aspect of the making of the European Union. And I tend to believe that this is lacking in India. Of course, you know, some of the issues that are related to this, and actually most of the issues that we have been discussing are international issues, because the Hindus. It has to do, well, fundamentally with India and Pakistan, but also with China. And Brahmaputra, it's Bangladesh, it's India, it's also China. But even within India, there is a lot to be considered in terms of river basins and overall logics of exploitation. Because even in underground, the underground water, there is a big communication between underground water phreatic bases. And this could be something where I always thought that India could give a European step forward. That is, try to mobilize or try to invite the states to cooperate, the states that are sharing water basins, to cooperate in water basin management structures. Because there are, the Ganga initiative from the present Indian authorities is the central government initiative. It is obviously getting with a lot of states, and it's a good example. But I think we should envisage more permanent type of structures to deal with it. I don't know what both of you think about this feasibility, if this is something that makes sense or not. Both of you are Indian, so you could, and you are working on this area, so you have a lot of sensibility, and if you think it's nonsense, please say so. But I would like to have your opinions on this, both of you.
No, well, state-state cooperation is something I think that's been a long-standing discussion, not just for water, for all kinds of issues, economic policy, fiscal policies as well. Well, it continues to be a discussion, and in some places with water, they have, if not cooperated, come to an understanding of how it works and know what their part of the role is, and that is already progress in the right direction. Maybe cooperation is a bit more political, so it has to be better managed, and there has to be a structure in place for that kind of direction to be taken forward.
Thank you very much. Tavi, I don't know if you want to add something on this issue or...
Yeah, I mean, just a quick one. I mean, it's not that easy to collaborate between states and India, because there is inherent competition between the better performing states, especially in terms of economic and urbanized states, as opposed to the weaker states. So there is that inherent competition. Plus, especially in terms of water management, there is continuing conflict between the states of, in general, water management. So till the time we don't resolve those conflicts, I think climate change is going to, I mean, talking about climate change, maybe superficially, yes, we would be able to get all of us on the same platform, but to actually fundamentally deal with these challenges is going to take some time.
Well, thank you very much. Well, we are now coming to a close of our webinar. I don't know if any of our guest speakers want to make any final remark.
No, just thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for listening, and I hope it was interesting.
Yeah. Thank you. Tavi, you want to...
No, thank you so much. I mean, I would especially like to thank Siegfried, because he's been pursuing this for quite some time, and he made this possible. And in fact, you, SADF, made this possible during COVID. So thank you very much for giving this opportunity for young researchers to share our research, because that's how we learn and we evolve as well. So thank you very much.
Well, SADF is very thankful for both of you. We would have preferred to have you here, physically present. That was actually what we thought of before the virus crisis. Unfortunately, this was not to be, but we did have your participation, and I think it was a positive contribution to highlighting the issues that go around the climate change. And we are very thankful for your participation. We are very thankful to all of those who have been following the discussion, who participated with questions within and out of SADF. And we are looking forward to our next webinar. Our next webinar is not yet set precisely in terms of date and in terms of participants, but most likely it will be done very shortly. And those of you who want to follow our initiatives, we would invite you to pay attention to our website, because most likely we will be announcing a webinar very shortly. So to all of you, thank you very much, and looking forward to meeting you in our next initiative. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, and take care all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.